Let's go. Are you kidding me? It's time for the post-spring depth chart. In just a second, we'll get to the quarterbacks. Comment down below who you think will be the starting quarterback for the Florida State game. And, of course, we are presented by Pressy Collection and PressyCollection.com. Check out the DBU watch right now. Promo code PHL. We're giving you all kinds of crazy discounts. Okay, let's start with the deepest position on LSU's offense, which is wide receiver. Before spring, this is how I had the depth chart: Kayshawn, Jarrett, and Malik. And after spring, I have Kayshawn, Jack Besh, and Malik Neighbors. You know, if you just went by the drills themselves, the open parts of practice, it seems as if Dre Jenkins was the most dominant receiver, and overall he had a decent spring game. He did have a drop on Garrett Nussmeier's deep pass, but right now, for me, Dre Jenkins is just slightly behind these three wide receivers right here. Obviously, Kayshawn's one of the best players in the country, and I feel as if Jack Besh and Malik Neighbors overall are the two top backup options to Kayshawn. I just don't think you could take Jack Besh off the field for any extended period of time, and the same thing is true with Malik Neighbors. But honestly, it is important for this year's LSU team, with Cortez Hankton now as the new wide receivers coach, to keep the rotation tighter, and I think a five-man rotation with Jarrett Jenkins and Brian Thomas Jr. would serve LSU the absolute best. Over the past couple of seasons, we've just seen rotation that's just far too deep, and we saw targets being sent to guys like Coy Moore and Devonta Lee, and those players are fine. They just weren't as good as some of the other targets on LSU's team. So you look at some of these other names: Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, and of course the incoming Landon Ibieta. Obviously, Landon's got a lot of potential. We haven't really seen him yet at wide receiver. I could see him get some run at returner, but more than likely, I do see him a little bit behind Chris Hilton and Kyron Lacey up to this point, and those two guys I do think will get their opportunities to play. This is why I didn't have Jack Besh as one of my starting wide receivers, is because before the spring, in our depth chart piece, I had Jack Besh as the starting tight end, simply because LSU's tight end room just wasn't that deep, and obviously Jack played some tight end. Now, I could see him still get some run at tight end. I've used this in live streams, 10.5 personnel, but for right now, I think Jack is turning towards playing wide receiver full-time, and the after-spring tight end is one of the biggest stars from the spring game, Cole Taylor. Now, we're going to be doing some more tight end deep dives over the next couple of weeks, but the backups here: Nick Storrs, Jack Mashburn, and the incoming Mason Taylor. We'll see what happens there as far as the transfer portal is concerned, but as of right now, that looks to be how the tight ends are going to line up. Now, as far as Cole Taylor is concerned, the big thing for me: can the blocking get better when it comes to that aspect of the game? He did actually block really well in the spring game. It was a little shocking to see, considering over the past couple of seasons his blocking was so wildly inconsistent. But we also said on this channel that Cole Taylor was always going to be a year 3 kind of guy as far as his development is concerned. So shout out to Cole Taylor, putting in a lot of work this spring, and hopefully we see him emerge as a really good tight end for LSU next year. Boom! I'm looking at you, okay? We always got to make sure you're there. Obviously, John Emery at running back seems to be the guy, and even after spring, even though John Emery didn't really play a whole lot in the spring game, I still believe he's going to have a long leash with the starting running back job. Now, of course, as many of you know, running back is a position that rotates, and you do have to have a good number of backups, but at the same time, John Emery is going to be the guy unless the pass protection issues are still there, and unless these backups still continue their ascent. Even if the blocking was absolutely perfect, which towards the end of the spring game it was, Armani Goodwin and Trey Bradford really did some good things, such as finishing runs strong and just showing you their overall breakaway speed. Now, as far as their broken tackle percentage is concerned, that is something they did not do as well as Corey Kiner. Kiner had one of the best broken tackle percentages in the SEC. He just didn't have the same speed transfer. So, I think these two do have some really good potential. I do want to see more broken tackles. However, two things that I did like to see from them was their ability to catch a football out of the backfield, and their pass protection was good. Now, Noah Cain is coming in, and we've done a film study on Noah Cain, and the bottom line is he's not a home run hitter like these other guys can be, but he does have a lot of big game experience, including some big-time fourth-quarter runs, and he's also shown the ability to catch a football out of the backfield. And, of course, as many of you know, Josh Williams is a great story. He's obviously worked his way up the depth chart, and he has played a lot more than any of us could probably even expect. But the bottom line is he's just behind the other guys in this depth chart when it comes to ability. Still, at some point, just like he has these past couple of seasons, Josh Williams is one thing that these other running backs aren't, which is healthy. He is the only one on this list that has not had any kind of injury history whatsoever. Noah Cain's had a really serious injury, and the other three have had nagging injury issues, so it's always good to have Josh Williams in that room. Now we get to the offensive line. Before spring, Miles Frazier, Anthony Bradford, Charles Turner, Tremont Shorts, and Cam Wire was the starting offensive line. And to me, the big story from spring practice was Will Campbell taking over this left tackle role, and it has not really even been close. It has been consistent 100% reps at left tackle with the first team, and that seems to be right now the guy that is the most heavily penciled in starter for Florida State. So a true freshman starting left tackle, especially after the Tyler Steen thing didn't happen, he's going to be the guy. Now, Tremont Shorts and Miles Frazier had really good spring games. The two transfers that are coming in, obviously we expected Frazier to be more of a guard. I could still see him potentially playing tackle, but as of right now, Charles Turner is going to be your center, and Cam Wire is going to be your right tackle, even though not many of you are sold totally on Charles Turner being the center going into next season. Now, as far as the backups are concerned, Garrett Dellinger is still one of the top names on this list because he did get a few starts last year. His health is going to be interesting, and more interesting is going to be what position he actually does play. Marcus Dumerville and Cardell Thomas are two other Tigers that did have really good springs. I mean, both of these young men are former top 150 recruits at offensive line. A lot of you are more familiar with Cardell Thomas. He's from Louisiana, Mr. Pancake, the most viral offensive lineman in the history of the sport. Coming out of high school. We'll see if he actually turns out to be the guy that we expect him to be. And obviously Marcus Dumerville from St. Thomas Aquinas is also a high potential prospect. A lot of these other names, I think Xavier Hill is the most interesting. The other three, a little bit more projections, but Marlon Martinez had a really good Florida game when he was called upon. And then, of course, the last two names are incoming freshmen who did not take part in spring, Emery Jones and Bo Bordelon. I really do think Emery Jones is going to be the real deal. In fact, he was my number one player in the class of 2022 that LSU brought in. I had Jones and then Campbell, and I hope I'm right about that because Will Campbell really looks to be the real deal and the best player in this class up to this point, but we'll see when Emery Jones makes his way, well, he's already in Baton Rouge, but makes his way to a full-time on the roster LSU player. And now we get to the most interesting battle. Now, before the spring, we had JAYDEN Daniels and MYLES BRENNAN as the clear-cut starters, as the two guys that would be battling for the starters role. And quite simply, there was an interesting development. Garrett Nussmeier is in the running. There's no other way you can cut it. He deserves to be in the running, and it's not just because of his great spring game. I go back to what I have said the entire spring about Garrett Nussmeier. If you strip away the jersey numbers, everything you know about the players, their experience and whatnot, if you were to go to practice and point at the most talented thrower of the football in the practices, I think most people would say it would be Garrett Nussmeier. Now, once again, these are just practices, and we also talked about how in our film study, which we will link down below, the defense played very simple coverages. So it did make it a little bit easier, but it made it easier for all the quarterbacks. So, for me, Garrett Nussmeier, he did struggle a little bit more when, there was a little pre-snap adjusting, but he does deserve to have his name in this race. Now, I still do have him slightly behind the other two simply because of the experience factor, but I do think if he kills it the way that he killed it in the spring when fall comes around, he's going to have a real shot at being the guy. And then, of course, Walker Howard, the long-term prospect at quarterback for LSU. Obviously, if you're Walker at this point, you have to feel pretty good with where you are. Yes, the spring game wasn't really, the biggest debut. But then again, the main focus was on the other three quarterbacks. Boom, I'm looking at you, okay? Now, we get to the extra little spicy nugget that we give to you at the end of each and every video. That's why you always got to watch to the very end, because there's always some outside the box thing that we like to give you outside of this depth chart. As you can tell, it was pretty chalk. I really do believe that's how the team is going to look. And I know I hear this all the time, that the spring game doesn't hardly ever tell you a whole lot about the team. But in all actuality, for the most part, if you remember in recent history, the starters in the spring game oftentimes are the starters when the season begins. So, a lot of the personnel you did see in the spring game are going to be the personnel that you actually see to start the year versus Florida State. Now, the one thing that's very interesting is a lot of what you saw today is going to come down to what type of team, and more specifically, what kind of offense Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock are going to want to run. And those are huge variables when it comes to this equation. Now, you could see in just a second a few videos that will be floating in your face, including our spring game film study breakdown playlist, and how about this? Let's put this one up here. The film study of a breakdown of Mike Denbrock's Cincinnati offense. I know you are going to love it. Once again, shout out to our friends at the Presley Collection and PresleyCollection.com. Make sure you check out those watches, baby. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom! And tonight, we're doing chicken wings. Let's go.